Shalom Alechem, peace be with you, and welcome back to the Jesus Way podcast, my friends. Today is the long-awaited Jesus Diet episode, which you guys have been clamoring for since we did our episode on the Essene Gospel of Peace a few months back. And I really think that the excitement around this topic is for very good reason, because I consider, and we consider, what we're going to be talking about today to be one of the most essential pieces to true embodiment of the Jesus way. And if you watch this podcast, then you know that embodiment is all that really matters to us here. We want to live this stuff. We're not interested in just proselytizing another belief system that you have to believe in to be saved. We focus singularly on the teachings of Jesus themselves, knowing that they were given by Yeshua in order to show us the true way to eternal life here and now. And so we're interested in learning how to live as Jesus lived and to follow the way that he set before us. And so we consider this topic to be one of the most central pillars of that way which Jesus taught. And that way is defined as absolute nonviolence, enemy love, forgiveness, and compassion for the least of these. So we're going to drop into it today. But before we do, I want to bring in our excellent co-host, Mr. James Benefico, who's joining us, of course, as always. And James, are you half as pumped as I am for this episode today?
This has been a long time in the making, and I could consider this episode and some of our other upcoming episodes as our magnum opus. This is, it's been such a transformative topic for our lives. And like you said, it all comes down to embodiment. This is a spiritual philosophy that you can embody every single day. And, talk is cheap. This is something that the proof is in the pudding. If you live it, you live it every single day. Every time you eat in your life, you can make a decision to live in harmony with the laws of the universe.
Mm-hmm. Well, to your point, James, we've been talking a lot on this podcast about the two ways philosophy, which was the original kind of Essenian Nazarene Christian philosophy that Jesus taught heavily in the Gospels. That's in all these ancient Nazarene texts that we've talked about and in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. And this topic today really gets down to the nitty-gritty, the practical application, right? Of you really are choosing between the way of life and the way of death in every moment. And especially when it comes to things like your dietary choices. We're going to unpack our personal stories of how we, as former meat eaters and lifelong carnivores, made this transition, or really how it happened to us, because we were full, meat-eating carnivores when we started studying the history of the Nazarenes and the kind of lost Jesus way. And this was something we stumbled upon, and it shook us to our core. And when we heard some of the arguments from the Essenes, Nazarenes, other texts like the Essene Gospel of Peace, which we're going to unpack today, we could not argue with the spiritual philosophy and ethics of the arguments being laid down. And for me personally, James, it really brought to rest an issue that had been causing a lot of internal conflict for me. And so we'll get into that. But before we do, James, I want to say a couple more things. We also consider this topic to be one of the most tragic elements of the historical Jesus that's been lost, since that's one of the things we talk about on this podcast a lot. Today, we're going to be introducing kind of a whole new paradigm that we believe is central to the Jesus way, which we haven't really gotten into yet, which is the kind of dietary lifestyle choices topic or subject. And so in that way, Jesus had a true, sincere love and compassion for animals, which the Roman Catholic Church, the church tradition that came after Jesus, went to great lengths to erase from their writings. And we want to bring that side of Jesus's personality back because, remnants and echoes of this side of Yeshua's personality still remain in the Greek Gospels we have today, with Yeshua famously cleansing the temple in all four Gospels, right? Freeing all the animals from their cages and telling the Pharisees, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. The knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings, quoting Hosea 6:6. And then he says, if you knew what this meant, you would not have condemned the innocent. And he's clearly speaking about the animals being sacrificed in this passage, right? And so we're going to show you the true heart of Yeshua for animals and all sentient creatures, and his teaching on the kingdom of heaven from Isaiah 11, where there is only compassion and nonviolence toward all sentient beings who live in peace together on God's holy mountain. That is the Edenic ideal that the Hebrew Bible paints. And so we'll be introducing the full sort of Jesus diet protocol today at the end of the podcast. But it's important for us to set this up correctly, right, James, that we want to help you guys appreciate the underlying philosophy of the diet itself. Because unlike many other diet types, whether it's keto, carnivore, vegan, or whatever else, the Jesus diet we're going to be showing you today is unique in that it requires an internal spiritual commitment, or like an oath that one makes to the Creator, which is accepting the axiom of the golden rule as a new standard of living. And so to us, this diet represents a baptism of sorts, a walking out of the former ignorance of the harm we bring to God's living creatures, and into the new awareness of the principle of universal compassion, which Jesus taught. And so this is the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would wish others to do unto you. So the other way we can summarize it is do no harm, because nobody wishes harm to be done upon themselves. And so under this philosophy, do no harm, one's dietary choices actually become quite obvious and intuitive. And I'll also say this, that I'm very aware that some listeners may not agree with what we're going to say today on this podcast. But from my personal perspective, I'll say this. For me, eating the carcass of a dead animal that was killed against its will has obviously negative spiritual consequences. And so we're going to unpack some of that today. But we're also going to do a deep dive into the historicity of this diet to show you why we believe this really is probably very close to the kind of diet that Jesus would have eaten himself, and how all the first Christians were strict vegetarians who rejected sacrifice and the temple cult and flesh consumption in general. And even most of the early church fathers shared this same sentiment until around, the time of Constantine, around 311 AD, where then vegetarianism begins to be shamed and ridiculed by the later church fathers, who sided more with Paul's take on the issue. But we're going to show you the evidence for all of this today, as well as expound upon Jesus's own ethics on this issue. And so that brings me to the final point, which is that this issue of flesh consumption is obviously a controversial one, and rightly so, I would say. But we want to be clear that we are not preaching that you should do this, or anyone who eats meat should stop eating meat, or anything like that. Again, we're not here to proselytize another belief system to anybody. We're just here to have a conversation in good faith on the spiritual implications and ethics of animal consumption, to see, can this really be defended from an ethics perspective? Because we believe and will demonstrate that it was a very important issue to Jesus and his moral ethics. And so therefore, we consider it to be one of the core tenets of embodying the Jesus way, to truly commit to a harm-free lifestyle, which we'll show you is absolutely possible, despite what some of the naysayers say. And so please know that non-judgment is one of the Jesus way axioms that we live by. So there is no judgment involved in this conversation today. Everyone's equally welcome to this table, to this conversation. But we simply believe that this issue is so important for spiritual growth, for happiness in daily living, and alignment with the Creator's will. And so we're going to make our case for this to you today and leave it up to you to decide for yourself based on your own convictions. However, one thing I think we can all easily put our hands together in agreement on is that the factory farming industry is the most obviously negative system on this planet, which completely mistreats animals in every possible way. And it's something that nobody in their right mind agrees with, and yet everybody just sort of turns a blind eye to it, because it's an inconvenient reality, right, that needs to be brought into the light for humanity to see and confront if we have any real hope of evolution and awakening. Because another reason this issue is so important to us, James, is that it has very real spiritual implications for our planet. Not just the immense, environmental damage that factory farming causes to the planet, but I mean the implications it has for our collective consciousness. If we cannot even treat the most innocent and blameless creatures on our planet with love and care and protection, if we continue to justify the mass slaughter and genocide of God's most innocent creatures, how are we ever going to stop slaughtering one another? How will we ever truly value human life if we can't even value animal life? The way you are with one thing is the way you are with everything. And so if we truly value animal life enough to protect them rather than slaughter them, then we would certainly never be able to justify things like war and genocide. And so for all these reasons, we want to err on the side of compassion and nonviolence because we believe that that's the side that Jesus would err on. So I'll close it off there and kick it over to you, James. What would you like to say to us before we dive into this episode?
Well, I just want to reiterate that Aaron and I did not dive into this research as vegetarians. Quite the opposite. We were hardcore meat eaters. I mean, eating meat was a huge part of my identity. I had a fitness business, a nutrition business, and I thought I knew it all about nutrition. I considered eating meat part of my culture, part of my identity as an Italian American, part of my identity as a man. I thought it gave me strength, and it was just, I thought vegans were weak cucks. I mean, I was extremely judgmental. And I just want to say that any kind of friction that's coming up to any meat eater who's watching this right now, Aaron and I went through it too. Every objection imaginable. Vegans are weak, vegetarians are stupid, Jesus ate fish, you name it. We have worked through every single one of these objections and found extremely satisfying answers. And not only that, we've come out the other side with this vegetarian diet with optimal levels of health. And we're going to get into our blood work later on. But Aaron and I have gotten stronger by every single metric. Our blood work has improved. Our testosterone levels, literally every single metric is optimal on this diet. So have objections as a meat eater, if you're feeling triggered, that is completely normal. And I really want to stress that if you have the courage as a meat eater to watch this podcast, you have my utmost respect, because a weak person will not watch this. They're going to get triggered and close it. And that's what I did when I was emotionally weak. I could not entertain this information. Look, I grew up, Italian American household. Eating meat was such a big part of my identity. You have such strong emotions around this. You have all these memories. My grandma making lasagna and meatballs. Like, do I have to throw out all these memories and parts of my identity? So I would just tune out when someone started talking about this stuff in the past because it was too emotionally painful. You want me to believe that such a huge part of my upbringing and all of these fantastic memories, there was some level of oppression and cruelty to animals involved with that? That's very painful to entertain. So if you can sit through this, you are a courageous person. You are brave because it's painful and it's not easy. So kudos to you. The last thing I'm going to say before I hand it back to Aaron is I hope everyone will put themselves in the shoes of the oppressed here, of these animals. Put yourself in their shoes. And an easy way to do this is to think about how we would feel if there is some higher level of intelligence than us. How would we want that intelligence to treat us? If an alien species came here, would they want us to factory farm us? Or would we want them to show us some level of compassion? And we actually are confronting this very issue right now as artificial intelligence becomes super intelligent. We are on the cusp of an intelligence being way more powerful than us. Okay, so are we going to want this AI to be programmed with compassion for us? Or are we going to want it to model itself on how we treat animals? Because if it does that, we are absolutely screwed. So keep that in mind as we go through this presentation.
Yeah, well said, man. And I want to emphasize something else you said, that this diet we're going to be giving you guys, we do believe that this is, and we're going to show you why, but we do believe this is sort of the original way that God intended for mankind to eat for optimal health and longevity. And that we've had our ideas of health and nutrition and diet very distorted by the negative polarity on our planet. But we're not going to give you some extremely specific type of way of eating. It's more going to be a dietary guideline or outline that is very customizable to you and your unique nutritional needs, whatever that may be. The Jesus diet is very flexible in many ways, in that you can tailor it to your own personal needs and lifestyle. But we're going to be doing today just a kind of part one on this, because it's such an immense topic and we want to really do it justice. So today is going to be more the what, the historicity, the spiritual philosophy of the diet, and of course, the diet itself, what it looks like. We're going to do a part two next week to show the why this diet works, why it's so effective at producing health and life and longevity in the body. We're going to get into the science, the nutritional science of this diet. As James said, we're going to show our personal blood work after almost 2 years of eating this diet. And we're going to give you guys some real hard proofs that this diet is producing very good fruit in our own personal lives. So with that being said, I think the best place to start, James, is our personal story with this. I was a vegetarian in 2019, I think. I did it for almost a year. And I didn't know much about nutrition back then. I wasn't eating properly. I was mixing macros in a horrible way, which we'll get into next week, the what not to do and stuff like that. But I was doing it wrong. And so my thyroid tanked, my hormones tanked. I was pretty much just eating rice with veggies and some Indian sauce over the top every day. Not a very well-balanced diet. Again, mixing fat and carbs, high fat, high carbs together. So my bloods didn't look that great. And my testosterone was very low. And so my nutritionist said, well, it looks like you need some saturated fat in your diet to create cholesterol to get your hormones back up. And so I thought, gosh darn it, man. Like, I don't want to eat meat anymore. It feels like it's a conflict inside of me. I don't feel right about this. I can't imagine that this is God's intention for man to murder animals that don't want to die and eat their flesh. I'd rather eat fruits and vegetables. But man, if my health has to suffer for it, I guess I have to go back to eating meat. And James, this is an experience that many people have, I think, when they try veganism or vegetarianism, because there's a right way and a wrong way to do everything. And no matter what diet you're on, carnivore, keto, vegan, you can do it wrong and you can do it right. And so we're going to teach you both of these sides of the equation, what it looks like to do it right and what it looks like to do it wrong. So there's no more confusion about that. But what ended up happening, James, was I spent the next, 3.5 years just trying to justify eating meat in my own mind so I could have some inner peace about it, right? Because, you were coming over to my house a couple times a week cooking ribeyes, right? We were eating steak together all the time. And I believed I needed a lot of flesh to have good testosterone levels and hormone health. But I was given a book called The Essene Gospel of Peace by a friend of mine, and I began to read it. And I was really struck by it immediately, just the beautiful kind of spiritual genius of the book itself and how it puts these topics of natural law so poetically and in a very ancient sounding way. And I was really compelled by it. And so I'd probably read, 20 pages or so, something like that, into the first portion of the book. And one night I woke up with insomnia, which was pretty rare for me at that point. And I could not go back to sleep. I tried for a couple hours to get back to sleep and couldn't do it. So I'm getting a little more frustrated as it happens. And I had this idea keep coming into my head of, hey, just go upstairs and read the Essene Gospel of Peace until you get sleepy again. And I finally just admitted defeat and said, okay, fine, I'm going to go upstairs and read the freaking book. So I march upstairs at 2:30 in the morning, and I open the book, and it was right at the section of the Essene Gospel where Jesus starts to outline the Jesus diet. So I hadn't read this part yet. And Jesus goes into, his spiritual philosophy in the Essene Gospel about flesh consumption and why it has so much negative energy to eat that which has been murdered against its will. He's saying things like, death can only produce death, whereas life can only produce life. And Jesus lays out the sort of first principles of how God wants us to eat. We're going to go over some of those today, but it's like, eat that which is alive, the fruit, the vegetable. something that hasn't been murdered for you to eat it, right? Eat that which is in abundance in nature, and so forth. And it just made sense to me, James. It clicked on a deep level. But then I read a line that just kind of shattered my cognitive dissonance forever. And I went, ugh, of course. It's so obvious. And it's where Jesus says, what God has made alive, let no man kill. And I just went, that's it. I am never eating flesh ever again. And it was a real transformative kind of spiritual awakening for me. And I sent you a voice message that night at like 3 a.m., James, just explaining the revelation I'd had. And I'll let you tell your side of the story. But I woke up the next morning to a voice message from you that was kind of saying like, wow, man, this is incredible. And like what you're saying makes sense and it resonates. And then you kind of took it and had your own experience with it. But I can't tell you, James, the relief I had to finally put that inner conflict to rest of now I understand there is no argument to be made whatsoever, not on ethics, not on biology, spiritual philosophy, zero argument that you can justify killing a sentient creature that does not want to die against its will and then eating its flesh. I know that this is a huge part of the American and worldwide culture to eat animals. But there's also a movement growing of people waking up spiritually to how obviously negative this is. And once you see it, you just can't unsee it. The decision makes itself. It's not something you should have to force yourself into. It's something you see as a kind of philosophical insight, and it transforms you. And the way that it allowed me, James, to embody the Jesus way, the true, like open-hearted love and compassion for all life, I just can't put it into words. Just astronomical ascension in consciousness happened. And all the effects we can talk about later just proliferated from there. So give us your take, James, on what was your experience after that night where I sent you the voice message and then you kind of went through your own process with it.
Yeah, that's the night that kind of started it all. And I dove into the Essene gospel of peace. And that really started getting my wheels turning philosophically that, you know, who'd have thunk it? Killing innocent animals might be not the most moral thing to do. And it started this awakening. But really what started hitting me was after the Essene gospel, I started diving into the history. And we had been diving into it.
Yeah.
I just kept noticing it. It's like, man, James the Just, Jesus's brother, the first leader of the church, was a vegetarian. All of these saints and church fathers and disciples were vegetarians. It's like, what is going on here? It seems like everyone was a vegetarian except Jesus. Wink, wink. Why would all of his disciples and why were the early saints saying that eating flesh was demonic, but Jesus ate flesh? That would be like the most heretical statement possible, saying that the Christ was doing something demonic. He would have been probably executed on the spot if it wasn't widespread knowledge that Jesus did not eat flesh. So again, the wheels keep turning. And then finally, I mustered up the bravery to watch some documentaries about what happens to these animals in factory farms and even on some of the pasture raised farms, because they're shipped off to slaughterhouses as well. And when I finally watched that, I said, my God, what have I been supporting? This is nothing short of satanic, the way these animals, it's like a concentration camp it's a horror show. Yeah. And when I was a mediator, I refused to watch that stuff because a part of me knew that if I ever did watch it, I just wouldn't be able to continue eating meat. But I was addicted. I loved the way meat tasted and I didn't want to give it up. So I buried my head in the sand. La, 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 la. I don't want to see it. And I think a lot of people do that because it's way too painful. I mean, I love my family so much. They're mediators and I showed them Christspiracy and there's some graphic scenes in there and they started screaming at me and yelling at me. Why are you showing me this? Yeah. I'm like, look, I'm not participating in this. You are. Why are you mad at me? You should be mad at yourself. But it just shows I totally love them and understand that it's just extremely painful to confront when you're doing something bad. It's not fun. It's not easy. So in a nutshell, that's been my journey and the effects have been tremendous. I also want to say that I didn't do this for my health. I did it for moral, ethical reasons. And I still had the belief that I think eating meat is probably good for me. So I don't know what's going to happen to my health as I go on this journey. But thank God my connection to God has strengthened. First of all, my health has skyrocketed. I'm stronger than ever. My blood is healthier than ever. And most importantly,
Mhm.
I feel a genuine love and connection to all beings I encounter now, where I didn't before. I was filled with certainly more judgment and less compassion for other people and animals. So that's been a huge blessing.
Yeah, man. Yeah, wow. Do you remember the night, bro, where you were at my house and we were doing some research and we started coming across these historical attestations from Hegesippus, Eusebius, Epiphanius, which we'll show you guys in our presentation right now. But saying these things you were mentioned of James the Just, the brother of Jesus, was a strict vegetarian who never consumed animal flesh. And we're like, oh, wow. That's the brother of Jesus that Jesus grew up with, and his brother never ate flesh.
From his mother's
Maybe
womb. So
from
that
his
means a
mother's womb, he says.
lifelong, that means he grew up in a vegetarian household.
Yeah. And that's from Hegesippus the Nazarene, an actual member of the Nazarene community said this. And that's why the church fathers quote Hegesippus so much, because they're like, he's the most reliable source to the apostles, right? And we came across all these passages where the church fathers are condemning the Nazarenes and other Jewish Christian sects, that they're all strict vegetarians. And we're like, whoa, the original Jewish followers of Jesus were all strict vegetarians? I never heard that before in church. And then we came across the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, where there's two quotes from church fathers reading from the Hebrew Gospel back in the 3rd century and stuff. And Jesus is quoted as saying, I do not want to eat this lamb with you on Passover. I do not wish to eat this lamb with you. And condemning sacrifice. I came to abolish sacrifices. And we're like, this is a whole different side of Jesus we've never seen. And then you go to the Syriac Aramaic Gospels, the Peshitta, and they have a quote from Jesus in Luke chapter 24, which has been omitted from the Greek Gospels we have today, where Jesus says, do not let your heart be hardened by the eating of flesh and the drinking of wine. And there's many scholars who believe that the Syriac Aramaic preserves an earlier version of the Greek that it was copied from. And so we're going to get into this today and show you, but it rocked our world. And then the Essene Gospel of Peace was kind of the last straw that broke the camel's back. When we read the spiritual philosophy that is outlined in this text, is just absolutely inarguable. There's nothing more precious to a living creature than its own life. And once you know that, the golden rule becomes the only way you can interface with any sentient being. And so let's go ahead and jump into the presentation, James, because we got a lot of good stuff to go through with you guys. But really, again, today we're just going to show you the historicity of why we believe this is exactly how, or very, very close to how, the original Nazarene Christians ate, the Essene type of Judaism. And we begin with this: God's original diet as prescribed in Genesis 1:28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And then the next verse says, and God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for food. So this is a big point that our friend Cam makes a lot, that we've been making on the podcast, that the original diet prescribed in Genesis is a plant-based diet. And it's after that, after the corruption of mankind and sin introduced into the world and all of that, that then flesh consumption enters the picture.
And this is so important because, most Christian meat eaters use the preceding verse about God granting dominion over the animals as proof that we can just enslave and kill them at will. But
Yeah.
God grants dominion, and then right after he grants dominion, he prescribes a plant-based diet. So clearly dominion does not involve enslaving and killing. It involves stewardship and protection.
Yeah.
It's right there.
Isn't that the heart of God? Do we really think God means have dominion means the way that a serial killer has dominion over their victims? Do whatever you want with them. Tear their flesh open, drink their blood, eat their flesh. I highly doubt it, right? Dominion probably means like protection, and we're the more intelligent species. And so it's kind of our responsibility to shepherd and steward the lower density beings on our planet. So this is kind of an interesting story, but when James and I met Cam a couple of summers ago, it was because he had come into town here in Austin to do a Christspiracy film screening. And we were kind of friends with him online and wanted to go meet him. So we went to his screening, and then after the movie was done, he did a Q&A with the audience. And I asked him if he had heard this argument before from Acts chapter 10, because Cam has all the best, vegetarian arguments for the Bible. And I brought up this passage from Acts 10 where Peter, in my opinion, totally admits to being a lifelong vegetarian. And he actually hadn't heard this argument before. And so it begins in Acts 10, 11 through 14, where Peter sees a vision. He falls into a deep trance while he's praying on a rooftop. So here's what the passage says. He saw the heaven opened and something like a large sheet coming down, being lowered to the ground by its four corners. In it were all kinds of four-footed creatures and reptiles and birds of the air. Then he heard a voice saying, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is profane or unclean." So I think this is a very telling passage, James, because it shows us here that Peter was clearly a lifelong vegetarian, like James the Just and all the other Christians. We're going to show you some quotes later from Eusebius, who says outright, all the disciples of the Lord, or apostles of the Lord, were vegetarians. So here Peter sees a vision of a sheet coming down with all kinds of four-footed creatures. So that means all animals that walk on four legs. Definitely that includes cows, pigs, lambs, etc. And a voice, it doesn't say God, it says a voice, says, "Get up, kill, and eat." Like, imagine God being like, "Come on, go kill." Like, probably this was the voice of Lucifer trying to deceive Peter. But Peter responds to this voice, probably believing it to be the Lord, saying, "By no means, Lord, I have never eaten anything unclean like this." Clearly speaking about all these kinds of four-footed creatures. So right here, even in the book of Acts, which is kind of an apologetic for the Gentile Christian movement, this is typically interpreted, right, James, that Christians will say, oh, this is God's way of telling Peter that the Gentiles are now included in this Jewish Christian religion. So it's kind of a Gentile apologetic passage, but it does preserve something we think is historically original to the Nazarenes, which is that they were all lifelong vegetarians.
And again, it goes back to the Garden of Eden we just got into. They understood what the ideal is. The ideal is peace and harmony. God prescribed a plant-based diet, and they were trying to live in accordance and alignment with the highest ideal.
Right. If we want to get back to the Edenic ideal that God established from the beginning, Genesis 1:28 and 29, which we just read, then we have to start living like that now. It's the only way it happens. We have to start going back to the original form of diet. And why would we choose the later form of diet, which Christians typically will justify, right? Well, after that, though, Noah comes along, then God commands flesh consumption and all this. It's like, yeah, because of sin, because in the beginning it was not so, the Bible says. So why would we err on that side of the diet that came after sin is introduced into the world? I want to go back to the diet we were given before sin entered the picture, according to the biblical narrative, obviously.
Christians believe that Satan, once sin came into the world, that Satan is now the God of this world. So when Satan became God of this world is when flesh consumption skyrocketed and became the mainstay. We want to get back to one. I mean, of course, we believe God is always God. There's only one God. But wouldn't it make more sense to eat in alignment with the way of the ideal when God was the ruler of this world and not Satan?
It's my personal preference, yeah. So we're going to show you that some of the early church fathers also believed this and clearly understood this Edenic ideal, because most of the early Catholic Gentile church fathers even were strict vegetarians. It was well known and it's well documented. We're going to show you that all the Nazarene Jewish Christians were strict vegetarians. And it's that tradition that the Gentile church plucked from and pulled from and made their own religion out of it. And so in the very beginning, when this mixing was happening, the Gentiles borrowing the Jewish Christian religion and following Jesus, right? They were borrowing this vegetarianism element for a while until eventually it kind of became uncool for the Catholic tradition. And now it's all about flesh consumption again. But let's look at what St. Jerome says here, who is the author of, the translator of the Latin Vulgate, a very influential church father. And he said the consumption of animal flesh was unknown up until the Great Flood. But since the Great Flood, we have had animal flesh stuffed into our mouths. Jesus, the Christ, who appeared when the time was fulfilled, again joined the end with the beginning, so that we are no longer allowed to eat animal flesh. And then later in letter 75 to Augustine, Jerome says the Nazarenes also reject animal food. So, wow, what a banger of a quote, where Jerome is saying Jesus joined the end with the beginning and took us back to the Edenic ideal, where now we no longer are allowed to eat animal flesh. I mean, this is one of the earliest Christian fathers of the religion, 380 CE, saying this, who's, 1700 years closer to the source than we are today. And he says, this is the message, you guys. Jesus ended flesh consumption when he put us back to the Edenic ideal. I mean, that's a pretty tough statement to argue with in the 21st century, that I'm right and a 4th century church father is wrong.
And someone so influential. I mean, he put together the Latin Vulgate, which was momentous for the church.
And then we have Saint Eusebius, who is called the father of church history. This is from 313 CE, who says, they, the 12 apostles, embraced and persevered in a laborious and strenuous life with fasting and abstinence from wine and meat. That's Proof of Gospel 3.5. So there's Eusebius saying all the apostles abstained from wine and meat, which is what, James? Essenian, right? This is the classic Essenian dietary philosophy. No wine and no meat. And it's echoed in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's echoed in the Syriac Aramaic, where Jesus says, do not let your heart be hardened by the drinking of wine and eating of flesh. So this is a long-standing tradition that is preserved in numerous different sources and texts, including the very mouth of the father of church history. And yet we have Christians continually sort of laughing at us for saying that Jesus and his disciples were vegetarians, because Christians today are so divorced from the true history of the Christian movement. And that's why we're doing this podcast. We want to bring these gems back to life, that look, the original form of Christianity was absolutely gangster and badass in every way. They opposed the temple cult. They split off from orthodoxy. They abstained from killing and flesh consumption in any way. And they really lived the golden rule axiom. It's so inspiring to me, James, and I know it is to our viewers as well, but we really can't emphasize this enough, that this is the original Jesus way and why it's such an important piece for our philosophy as well. So now we have some attestations about the disciples being vegetarians, Thomas, Matthew, and the Essenes as well. So why don't you just kind of read through these quotes for us, James?
Sure. The Apostle Thomas continually fasted and prayed and abstained from the eating of flesh. He eats only bread with salt, drinks only water, and wears the same garment in fine weather and in winter, accepting nothing from anyone, and gives whatever he has to others. And that's from the Acts of Thomas, chapter 20.
Okay, let's pause there really quick. I want you guys to see something here. Now, Christians notoriously will call any text outside of the canon as, oh, it's just some Gnostic forgery that's just completely made up nonsense. It's kind of how they see it, right? But this is not how scholars and historians see these texts. Historians and scholars don't play theology when it comes to source texts. They just say, what are the earliest attestations we have? What are the earliest written records from any tradition? That's how we know what's most accurate in history. And so the Acts of Thomas, many scholars date it to the 1st century, others date it to the 2nd century. But I want you to see, again, the tradition here being preserved. It describes Thomas as a classic Essene. He's got all the staples of Essenism, continually fasting and praying. Josephus, Philo, Pliny all say this about the Essenes. They fasted, they prayed, they abstained from flesh, they abstained from alcohol. They eat only bread with salt, or he ate only bread with salt, drank only water, wears the linen garment, which is the classic Essene garment, and accepts nothing from anyone and gives everything he has to others. That is the Essene philosophy, as outlined in the Dead Sea Scrolls and elsewhere. So we have Thomas, the disciple of Jesus, being described in the 1st or maybe 2nd century as a classic point-for-point Essene. And so Christians just assume that these texts must be all made up nonsense, but that isn't how it works. This is just another tradition, another Christian writing that was eventually deemed, heretical by the Catholic Church, which itself is the most heretical organization on earth. So who cares what they think, right? We care what's historical and accurate to the tradition. And this is one of the earliest written attestations of the disciple Thomas, or any disciple. And look at what it says. I mean, this is a remarkable passage that, again, is just one of the hundreds and hundreds of proofs we've gathered at this point that Jesus and his disciples definitely emerged from this Essene type of Judaism.
Yes, this is classic Essene philosophy, the simple living, the charity, and the rejection of flesh consumption. And we'll see it over and over again. Next, we have Clement of Alexandria writing, accordingly, the Apostle Matthew partook of seeds and nuts, hard-shelled fruits and vegetables, without flesh.
Wow. Yeah, so here we have another second century source, Clement of Alexandria, describing the disciple Matthew exactly like Thomas. Simple diet, abstains from flesh consumption. I mean, we're point for point on every record. Eusebius says all the disciples, abstain from flesh. We have already showed you 3 or 4 remarkable attestations that, again, Christians will just laugh this subject off because they've never heard it taught in church. But when you do the real research, you go, oh my gosh, there's like a mountain of evidence for this. And we're just showing you some tidbits. But here's what I think is really cool, James, is that Josephus, Philo, and Pliny also describe the Essenes as traveling light. They just wear the same clothes. They travel with the shoes on their feet and the clothes on their back. They don't take anything with them. And they're very generous. They give everything to the poor that they have. This is exactly what Jesus describes in the synoptics to his disciples when he sends them out, right? Jesus famously said, when you go out to travel, don't take anything with you. Just take your cloak and your staff or whatever, and trust that God will provide for you on the road and people will let you in. And he says, when you go into someone's house, Jesus literally gives the Essene greeting, which we give here at the opening of every podcast. Shalom Alechem, peace be with you. He says, when you enter someone else's household, greet them by saying, peace be with you, peace be with your house. Also the classic Essene greeting. And so here we have Josephus at the bottom who says, their diet is simple. They do not change their clothes or shoes until they are worn out. Also matching what's in the synoptics, also matching these attestations. So it's amazing to me, James, how everywhere we go, whether it's first century historians, secular historians, church fathers, the Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of it converges in the exact same direction, which is that all the first Christians were Essenes and they were strict vegetarians. There is no getting around this information at this point. And we're going to show you a whole lot more, but some of this stuff can shock people, James, that they've never heard this taught in church. They've never heard this taught even in universities, right? I'm taking my master's degree right now at a secular university, and I've not heard a peep in any of my classes or courses yet about this Nazarene Christian Essene type tradition that is so well attested to. It's a very strange, puzzling thing, to be honest with you. But we believe that these remarkable people who, abstained from flesh, abstained from animal sacrifice, lived peaceful lives, fasting and praying for others, giving to the poor, wearing only white linen. Like, what an incredible race of people that has been forgotten by history. And Jesus, who we know and love, emerged out of this most incredible race of people, this Essene type Judaism. And it's all been forgotten in the church history books. And so we want to give these amazing Essene Jews who've been forgotten by history their limelight, their credit. They are so laudable and inspiring for their lifestyle. And we draw great inspiration from them on this podcast as well, because we think that this was the group Jesus emerged from.
I mean, to be living to 120 years and above is just so incredible for that time period. Clearly, these people were extremely tapped into natural law and living in harmony with the laws of the universe. Mm-hmm. But Aaron, are you sure Jesus said to not take it? I thought Jesus said to take a bow and arrow and a knife so you could butcher the animal and cut it up into pieces. I thought Jesus
skin
said
it. Yep.
Skin it, and then you need to bring your cooking utensils to cook the flesh. I thought that's what Jesus said.
Maybe that's a different Bible.
Next, we have St. John Chrysostom, one of the most renowned saints in Eastern Orthodoxy. And he said, the saints are exceedingly loving and gentle to mankind, and even to brute beasts. For this reason, it was written, a righteous man has regard for the life of his beast. And he's citing Proverbs there. Surely we ought to show them, the animals, great kindness and gentleness, for many reasons, but above all, because they are of the same origin as ourselves. It's so beautiful.
So good. And St. Francis of Assisi is, one of the most highly revered church fathers of all time. And he said, all creatures are our brothers and sisters in God's family.
The patron saint of the animals.
And then we have Epiphanius from the Panarian. They, the disciples, abstain from meat. They abhor eating meat and do not consume wine. They say it is unlawful to eat meat, for it was not ordained by God in the beginning, which again is what Jerome also said, right? This is what the first Christians believed. God did not ordain flesh consumption from the beginning in the Garden of Eden. This is a negatively polarized ideal that crept its way into the Bible and the Christian tradition. It was not that way in the beginning. Here's yet another attestation for that by a church father. And then we have Yeshua the Nazarene, we mentioned before. He was the historian of the Nazarene church led by James the Just, the brother of Jesus. And he says, he, James the Just, drank no wine or strong drink, nor did he eat meat.
Next, we have the legendary Leonardo da Vinci, one of the most incredible men who ever lived. Artist, a polymath.
One of the greatest minds who's ever lived.
A true genius. And he said, I have from an early age abjured the use of meat, and the time will come when men such as I will look upon the murder of animals as they now look upon the murder of men.
Wow. And that's what we're seeing today. Like, people are starting to wake up to this, that life is life. It doesn't matter what form life is in. I mean, just because an animal is less intelligent, by no means can somehow justify killing it against its will and eating it. Because if you say, well, it's less intelligent than us, so we can do whatever we want. It's like, okay, so mentally handicapped people with Down syndrome, we can just kill them and eat them, right? Do whatever we want with them. That's not an argument. You can't justify harming a creature because it's less strong or intelligent or whatever than you are. Life is life, and all life is equally sacred because it comes from the one life, the one source of all life. And that's what Leonardo da Vinci is trying to say here.
Yeah. And real quick, we get comments when we talk about this stuff that vegetarianism is demonic, that you can't be healthy, that you can't thrive without meat, that it's a spiritually unaligned diet, all of these things. Okay. Well, then you're saying that James the Just, St. Francis of Assisi, Leonardo da Vinci, some of the greatest men, Matthew, some of the greatest men who ever lived. Leonardo da Vinci made an impact on history that few other people have ever made. Didn't eat meat. I mean, it just totally dismantles that argument right away. And then we see all of these incredible athletes today who don't eat meat. Novak Djokovic, there's many. World record-setting power lifters, ultra endurance marathon runners. So I used to believe these arguments that you couldn't be healthy or successful or vibrant or intellectual without eating meat. But it's so obviously false when you look at the history. Look at all these incredible people. Nikola Tesla. It's endless.
Again, there's countless people that thrive on these kinds of diets and live the Essenes, for example, right? Living the longest lifespans on Earth that probably hasn't even been seen since the Essenes. And so I think it's also interesting to look at the way that the argument is stigmatized. The meat eating, side of the argument always has to ad hominem and strawman the vegetarian vegan side, saying, oh, they're dumb, they're stupid, they're weak, they're this, they're that. It's because the people who eat those diets are fundamentally flawed, dumb, stupid, bad, whatever. And it's like, do we have to do that to carnivores? Do we say, oh, all meat eaters are blankety blank, blank, blank? No, we understand why people eat meat. We have space for it. We get it. And we want people to come to this conclusion on their own. So what does that say about the nature of the argument, right? If you have to attack the person on the other side of the argument, you don't really have an argument anymore. You're grasping at straws at that point. And here's the passage from the Syriac Aramaic gospel, which I mentioned earlier. Luke 21:34 says, be on guard so that your hearts do not become heavy with the eating of flesh and with the intoxication of wine and the anxiety of the world. Now, in the Greek we have today in our Bibles, James, it says something really weird here. Instead of eating flesh, it says, do not let your hearts become heavy with dissipation and drunkenness of wine. And you look up different translations, they all have a different word there, like surfeiting, dissipating. I have no idea what it even means, really. But again, many scholars believe, and there's a lot of good evidence to show that the Syriac Aramaic was copying from an earlier version of the Greek, which has been lost. We have the only manuscripts we have begin around the late second, early third century. But the Syriac Aramaic very well may preserve an earlier Greek edition. And of course, being Syriac Aramaic, it was the language that the Nazarene Christians would have spoken and read from. So that's an interesting piece of evidence. And then we have Jesus and the Passover. From the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, which we've shown on this podcast, is undoubtedly the first written account of Jesus dating between 30 to 50 CE, attested to by over a dozen church fathers, written by Matthew, the disciple himself. And in the Hebrew Gospel, it says, I have no desire to eat the flesh of this Passover lamb with you. And even in the Gospels, in the Bible, James, Jesus is never seen eating lamb. It never says they ate lamb. It says they ate unleavened bread, which is another interesting piece of evidence. Luke 22:15 is a sort of variant of this, which says, with great desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. So you see how they're changing the wording a bit to fit the Gentile narrative, right? In the Clementine homilies, Peter is quoted as saying, the unnatural eating of flesh meats is as polluting as the heathen worship of devils. So that gives you a clue just how seriously the Nazarene Christians took this issue. And another interesting thing here, James, is that we can understand why the Gentile tradition had to scrub out this vegetarian message from the original Christian movement, because they're trying to appeal to a Gentile Greek audience, which was a heavily meat-eating culture and a heavily animal sacrificing culture. So it's hard enough when you've got people who worship Greek demigods who come down from heaven and perform miracles and ascend back to heaven to say, hey, you should follow this Hebrew man who was a rabbi who got crucified, and he was the Messiah. Like, that wouldn't be impressive to a Hellenistic Greek person of that day. They're like, I'll keep my Greek demigods, thanks. And so then you add on top of that, oh, by the way, you have to be a vegetarian too, because they were all vegetarians. It's like, now you have absolutely no shot at converting Greek Gentiles to this message. And so you could see good reasons why it wasn't some malevolent thing they were doing, right, James? But it was just kind of the happenstance of the time period that they had to just kind of ease down this message to make this message more palatable to the Greek world of the day.
So here are all of the sources that cite the early Christians, the Nazarenes, as being vegetarians. And it's an incredible list. We have church fathers like Clement of Alexandria, John Chrysostom, Tertullian, Origen, St. Eusebius, St. Jerome. We have historical sources like Josephus, Philo, Pliny, and Hegesippus. Early Christian texts like the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, the Syriac Aramaic Gospels, or the Peshitta, the Essence of James, the Clementine writings, and the Didache.
We also forgot the Acts of Thomas.
Acts of Thomas as well. We have church leaders like Epiphanius, who was the Bishop of Constantia, Papias, the Bishop of Hierapolis, Silanius, Irenaeus, and even the Apostle Paul.
Yeah, even Paul in his writings clearly shows that the Nazarene Christians were vegetarians. And he shit talks them a bit, and he's like, just don't eat meat around them, you'll offend them. But he's like, really, it's only weak people do that. It's like, even in 50 CE, we have an attestation from Paul that these first Nazarene Christians were vegetarians. And Paul, didn't really like that about them, right? Because he was a Greek.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have historical sources, Josephus, Philo, Pliny, Hegesippus, we've all been over. So I just want you guys to just breathe this in. Look at this sampling. This is the who's who of church fathers, all clearly attesting, yes, the disciples of Jesus were strict vegetarians. His brothers were strict vegetarians. You really think Jesus was out there barbecuing lamb? I'm highly skeptical. And then we have source texts, and then we have secular sources, and we have church leaders. All of these sources confirm this fact that we're talking about today.
So this also goes to show me that they were reading different scripture than we are. And I highly recommend our friend Cam Waters' videos about the fish stories. But if all of these church fathers are reporting that the disciples didn't eat fish or any meat, then they were clearly reading a different Bible than we are, that did not
Mhm.
include these fish stories, the Passover lamb, things like this.
Yeah, we're going to do a whole episode on the fish topic, which Cam is kind of the expert at, because it is an amazing rabbit hole to go down when you find out that all our earliest records that talk about multiplying the fish and the loaves make no mention of fish. They only talk about the loaves. And there's all kinds of clues in the Gospels as well that says, for they did not understand the mystery of the loaves, no mention of fish. And you see that scribes started adding in the fish later, again, for their Greek audience to say, look, they weren't just vegetarians, guys, they ate fish too. Like this was a huge pressing issue for the evangelists of the Gentile Christian tradition that we don't understand today because we're coming at it 2,000 years later. But our earliest records show this was a very controversial issue for the Greco-Roman world. They didn't like this aspect of the Nazarene Christians, and so they made it palatable to their culture. So we're going to do a whole episode on that with Cam in another segment, but I'll kick it over to you, James, for this one as well, because you've got some interesting thoughts.
Yeah, well said. And the one thing I'll add before we get to this next slide is that, look, even if we accept it at face value that maybe Jesus ate fish once in a while, they would go out with their friends and catch some fish once a week or whatever. But the mental gymnastics to take that and say, well, Jesus ate fish every once in a while, so I can support the mass enslavement, factory farming, so I can gluttonously pig out on meat 3 times a day. It is such a leap. And
Yeah.
even if Jesus did eat fish, I am 1,000% confident he would see our factory farming system here in the United States as unequivocally demonic and satanic, and that our consumption of flesh is gluttonous in nature.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if you want to be consistent with your argument, right? If you're going to say, well, I just want to follow what the Bible says Jesus did because I believe that's the record. Okay, then don't eat any animal flesh except fish from now on, because there is absolutely no record of Jesus eating any kind of animal in the Bible, except for 1 or 2 of those fish stories, which we can show you are not real attestations of Jesus, but later additions. But even if they were, it's like, okay, cool, then just eat fish. Give up all land animal meat, right? And of course, Christians don't do that. They just say, well, he ate fish, so I'm going to barbecue this weekend. And it's like, well, but Jesus didn't barbecue. Don't you want to be consistent with how Jesus ate? Also, kind of a funny argument to make.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to cruise over this. This is just a list of biblical figures, church fathers, other notable figures that were all vegetarians. Now, let's transition out of the historicity into the spiritual philosophy of this diet. And this is going to come mostly from the Essene gospel of peace, because we believe that the Essene gospel makes these arguments the best. And so this is from a passage in the Essene gospel where Jesus is quoted as saying, "It was said to them of old time, honor thy heavenly father and earthly mother, and do their commandments, that thy days may be long upon the earth. And afterward was given this commandment, thou shalt not kill, for life is given to all by God, and that which God has given life, let no man take away." So that was the passage, James, that shook me to my core. And it also brings in another good point, right? That I think it's the 6th commandment is thou shalt not kill. There are no stipulations in there about only people. You can kill anything else. You can go around slaughtering, yeah, just not people. It's like, no, that's not what it says. It says, thou shalt not kill, period. So why would we want to err on the side of, well, maybe he meant we could kill, but just not, people? I'm not willing to make that risk personally from a spiritual perspective. I'm going to err on the side of, let's just be safe. Thou shalt not kill any life.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus says it very beautifully here. That which God has given life to, let no man take away. You are essentially fighting God's creation, God's will for creation. God put life, breathed the breath of life, the ruach, into that being. Who are you to say, that being's life belongs to me? And you go kill it and skin it and eat it. It's like, how is that the kingdom of heaven ideal?
And meat eaters even know this is true. For instance, if a meat eater is walking around and they see someone brutally killing a dog or a cat, or when we see the videos of Japanese fishermen just butchering dolphins and
Mm-hmm.
whales, or any creatures that for whatever reason we tend to ascribe more sympathy to, we all know it's wrong, and we know that it's wrong to kill.
It
It's
provokes
just,
outrage.
it provokes sadness, outrage, horror. But through this process of our culture and just being accustomed to it as children, we divorce our minds from the fact that it's also wrong to kill cattle. It's also wrong to kill pigs, just the same as it's wrong to kill a dolphin or a dog or a horse.
Right. So with that being said, let's get into the 3 qualifications for the Jesus diet, or karma-free eating. These are the 3 criteria Jesus lays out in the Essene gospel.
First is eat what is alive. Kill neither men nor beasts, nor yet the food which goes into your mouth. For if you eat living food, the same will quicken you. But if you kill your food, the dead food will kill you also. For life comes only from life, and death only comes from death. Your bodies will become what your foods are, even as your spirits become what your thoughts are. For your
Mm,
body is that which you eat, and your spirit is that which you think.
such a beautiful passage. And I really don't know how anyone could argue this, man. It's like, we know biologically our body literally is made out of the food we eat. So, do I want my body to be made out of dead flesh that was tortured and killed against its will and died in fear and suffering? I really don't. I'd rather have the life force energy in fruit and vegetables and herbs, like the prana, the chi that's alive when you eat it. When you kill an animal, James, the life force energy, the consciousness leaves that animal, and you're just getting the dead, rotting flesh. And it's like, when you kill an animal, watch how fast that flesh rots. I mean, butchers have to get that meat into the freezer quick because it very quickly decays and grays and gets very disgusting to look at. So
Parasites.
most like fish and red meat at the supermarket is actually dyed red, because otherwise it would look gray and old and ashen and just disgusting. And it's like, yeah, do I want to be putting this stuff in my body? Not to mention how much longer, 5 times the digestion time it takes to break down meat, which slows down your whole metabolism, weighs down your gut. There's so many implications of eating dead flesh just from a nutritional standpoint, which we'll get into next week. But I just love this axiom of like, eat what has the life force energy of God in it. That's what creates health and longevity in the body.
So, Aaron, what would you say to people who are going, "Oh, well, you're killing plants, or you're causing suffering with plant agriculture because mice and insects are killed in the process of that"?
Well, we're going to do an episode with Cam in studio next week, and we're going to get into all those questions of unpacking those arguments of, oh, doesn't agriculture kill as many as the factory farming industry, or whatever the argument is. It's very silly, in my opinion, to claim that someone who eats vegetables is contributing to just as much death and suffering as somebody who eats factory farmed meat. But the simple response, James, is that plants have no central nervous system, which means it is impossible that they can feel pain or psychologically suffer. Even without a brain, you can't feel pain or psychologically suffer, let alone a nervous system. And so that doesn't mean plants aren't sentient and they can interface with the environment in ways or sense the environment. They definitely can. But we're interested in minimizing suffering. And there is no evidence at all that plants can suffer in a way that a animal can. So it really does make me shake my head a little bit when I hear people try to make that argument of like, well, but you kill plants. Don't you think that they can suffer? It's like, you really think that biting into an orange or a tomato or a bell pepper is the same as killing a cow or a goat? It's just kind of a crazy argument.
It is. And most of the things we eat, we're not killing. The fruits, the tree still lives. With most of the
Right.
plants, the root survives, the plant actually survives the harvesting process.
Well, that is actually the philosophy we give when people want to know, like, what's the premise of the Jesus diet? We say it's a harm-free, death-free diet. But you eat plants. No, no, no. I don't eat plants. I eat what plants produce, the bell pepper, the tomato, whatever. I don't eat trees. I eat what trees produce, the fruit. And fruit's literally designed to be eaten so it can spread, the seed. And then likewise, I do not eat animals. I eat what animals produce, milk and eggs, in a cruelty-free, harm-free way. We'll get into that later, but that's kind of the premise of the Jesus diet. And so with that, we have the second axiom. Eat what is abundant in nature. So Jesus is kind of laying out here. Here's how you know what the Creator intended mankind to eat. Eat what is alive, eat what is abundant in nature. For I tell you truly, the God of the living is richer than all the rich on the earth, and his abundant table is richer than the richest table of feasting of all the rich upon the earth. Eat therefore all your life at the table of our earthly mother, and you will never see want. So I love this picture too, because it's describing that the earth is infinite and abundant. We can grow infinite fruit and vegetables and herbs and seeds and nuts and legumes. No matter how much our population size grows, we can always provide for every human being on earth to eat this way because the earth is abundant. We can always grow these crops infinitely. And it's pretty cool, James, when you study this kind of agriculture, that I think like 1 acre of land could feed like 120 people or more just on 1 acre of farming fruits and vegetables. So yeah, we live in an abundant earth. And so why do we need to go around killing sentient creatures just to have nourishment? This is not the way God designed it to be. And then the third axiom of the Jesus diet that Jesus gives is to eat what is local and what is real, like real food that's not brought from far away or processed or whatever. Jesus says, eat not unclean foods brought from far countries, but eat always that which your trees bear. For your God knows well what is needful for you, and where and when. He gives to all people of all kingdoms for food that which is best for each. So the idea is when you eat food that travels from a faraway land, the life force energy in that food is going to start to degrade over time once it gets detached from its life force, from the tree or from the vine or whatever. And so you want to eat that food as fast as possible when you pluck it from the earth, right? That's what Jesus is laying out here. So in our day and age, yes, it's a little bit trickier to do that. Way more people, way more spread out. But the axiom is do your best to eat what is local, locally grown honey, fruits, vegetables, and so forth. If you can grow your own food, that's kind of the ultimate, right, James?
Oh, yeah. And, it's interesting. It was very prophetic because now we see with big agriculture and the crops, when it ships from across the world, it's usually sprayed with a lot of stuff to keep it fresh or appearing fresh. So it's very relevant to today.
Yeah, they literally have to soak our food in poison just to get it to us before it rots and decays. So that's a natural law, right? Because fruits and vegetables and vegetarian foods decay once they're taken from their source, there's a ticking clock on them, right? You want to eat them as soon as you can because natural law dictates this. It doesn't want you to eat things from very, very far away for many good reasons. So that's the third axiom that Jesus gives. And so in terms of laying out the diet itself, the way it's structured, this is the Jesus diet food pyramid to make this kind of simple for you.
So eat always from the table of God, the fruits of the trees, the grain and plants of the field, the milk of the beasts, and the honey of the bees. For everything beyond these is of Satan, and leads by the way of sins and diseases unto death. But the foods which you eat from the abundant table of God give you strength and youth to your body, and you will ever see diseases.
So let's break down this food pyramid and explain why we have these categorized the way that they are. This is definitely the way we've been eating for the last few years. And we can say for a lot of good reasons that we believe the vast majority, 50% of what we eat should be fruit and honey and fruit juice. And you can throw vegetables in there as well. But specifically fruit, we believe is the supreme food for humanity. If you can shift your diet to being 50% organic fruit, you will be amazed at the health benefits that you gather from this. First of all, energy will go through the roof. Metabolism and fat loss goes through the roof. Fructose is a very powerful molecule of sugar that activates some really amazing longevity hormones like FGF21 and AMPK, which preserve muscle mass, burn body fat, and help extend your lifespan. They increase your longevity markers. So fruit is the food for longevity. If you want to look young, feel young, have vibrant vitality and energy, you got to eat fruit and fruit juice as well. Honey is also an amazing source of energy and nutrients. Honey is something Jesus talks about a lot in the Essene Gospel of Peace as an amazing food. So we know that there's probably vegans listening to this who have their disagreements on, no, I don't think you should eat honey. I don't think you should eat eggs or milk. And so I want to just give our take on this if I can. We totally respect that point of view, and I understand it's a good argument to be made. But when it comes to natural law, maybe this is because I look at everything through the kind of law of one lens of the densities model and reincarnation and so forth. But this is touched on a little bit in the law of one, that animals are second density life forms. Humans are third density life forms. Extraterrestrials that are hovering in our skies these days are fourth density and beyond. And so one of the ways that the densities works, James, is that each density level helps the previous one to evolve towards that next density. So the fourth helps the third helps the second helps the first. And so the way that the third density helps the second to evolve, meaning every animal that we see is a real divine soul, just like you and me. And this is also something that near-death experiencers attest to, right, James? That many NDEs will come back saying, hey, I had a past life regression in my NDE. I saw my past lives, and I saw a lifetime where I was a fox, where I was a deer, where I was this animal, that animal. Not uncommon that you hear this in near-death experiences. And so if that's true, that every animal is also a living soul like you and I, that's on an evolutionary journey, the law of one explains how when we adopt pets, for example, and we have a cat or a dog and we give it a name, we give it rules, boundaries, and limitations, we're essentially teaching that second density soul how to be a third density human. And so this is the way that karma works in natural law. There has to always be a mutual giving and receiving, equal reciprocity, right? That's the positive polarity. And so here's my argument, my justification for eating eggs and raw milk and honey, if and only if you can get them from a cruelty-free source that treats their animals with love and kindness, doesn't do things like forced insemination and all that. I'm against all that stuff. But I've been lucky enough, blessed enough to procure raw milk and eggs from a farm here in Austin that I've actually been to that they do treat their animals this way. They love their animals. They don't do forced insemination. They let bulls come in and naturally mate with the females, and they have tons and tons of milk left over, tons and tons of eggs left over, and these animals live great lives. If you're going to give an animal, James, free food, free shelter and protection, they never have to worry about predators. They never have to know where their next meal is coming from. You're fully providing for this animal, like on a farm. It's not too much to ask that the animal give something back in return as a kind of thanks, right? Whether it's some of their eggs or their milk, whatever's left over that the animal doesn't use. And so that's the giving and receiving that actually helps that second density soul to evolve and polarize towards third density. When a second density creature engages in a giving receiving relationship with a third density human, their soul is becoming third density in that lifetime. And so that's a little bit of an argument from natural law. And I totally understand if some people still don't agree. But just so we can clear up that question, because it comes up a lot on this topic with vegans, this is why we believe that on the Jesus diet, there is room for eating eggs and milk if you can fit it into that criteria of no harm, cruelty free. And if you can't, like when I travel, I don't eat eggs or milk that I can't know, because I can't know, right, where I'm getting this from. Even from like a supermarket or something that says cage free and all that, I just don't know for sure. So I'm not going to eat eggs when I travel. So that's the way that I do it. James, you ate this way for, I think, the first year and a half or so. And I've recently decided to just go off of eggs and milk altogether. So this is the way we describe that this diet is very customizable. You don't have to eat any one certain way, but it's like, these are the food groups, these are the axioms you want to follow, and you can customize the diet to your preference from there.
Yeah, it's fully customizable, and we wanted this to be kind of open source so it can meet people where they're at. And even if you don't feel comfortable giving up meat yet, You know, you could even go pescatarian for a bit with the goal of eventually going down to vegetarian. And it might not be a bad idea as your gut flora and microbiome adjust to the new diet. It could
Yeah.
actually be counterproductive to just go from full blown meat eater to vegan overnight, because it's completely different gut microbiomes that
Yep.
are necessary to digest these different diets. So we do recommend a gradual transition. And regarding the raw milk and eggs, you know, I totally understand the vegan perspective on that. I've given up the dairy. I'm actually back eating some eggs, Aaron, but it's it's very important to know that 99% of the time there's going to be cruelty involved in these industries, and it is difficult to procure cruelty-free eggs and milk. The ideal scenario for the future Earth, which we are manifesting, is there will be family owned or local neighborhood farms. So one family will have chickens, backyard chickens. Another family will have some cattle, and they'll be part of the family. They'll be part of the community. Those animals will be part of the community. It won't be this kind of enterprise of animal agriculture as much as being a neighborhood wholesome loving endeavor. That's the ideal vision. So if you are
Yeah.
interested in raw milk and eggs, you're going to have to get involved with your local farmers market. You probably can't find it at the grocery store, and talk to them, get to know them, and hopefully you could find something good. And if you can't, you could be extremely healthy and vibrant without it as well on the vegan diet.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that's just kind of the nuance to all of this.
Yeah. And I want to also say that the milk and eggs aspect for me, James, was huge in helping me give myself permission to go off meat
Yeah.
because of that experience I'd had, like many people have had, where it's like, hey, I tried it and my hormones tanked. It didn't seem to be healthy. And so I thought, man, I really do need meat to have healthy hormone profiles. And I learned about, oh, raw milk, eggs have all the same kind of nutrient values that meat has, and even better in many cases. It's got the saturated fat that helps thyroid. But eggs, for example, if you eat 20 grams of protein from egg whites, that's going to take about 1.5 hours to digest in your stomach. Whereas 20 grams of beef protein is going to take 6 to 8 hours. And so when I learned that, I thought, whoa, that's a way faster digestion time, which means it's going to be more life extending, right? Digestion is the most energy expensive process in the body. And there's a concept, right, James, in Taoism, I believe, called Jing, which means we all have a preset amount of life force energy that our souls incarnate with. And you cannot extend it, you can only preserve it. And so people who, smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, party, don't sleep well, eat tons of meat, all these things that require energy from the body to recover and metabolize and digest, you're burning out your jing faster and faster. So your lifespan is going to be shorter and shorter. Whereas the Essenes, who didn't drink alcohol, didn't eat flesh, didn't party, fasted and prayed, they were preserving their jing much longer so they could live to 100, 150 years old, like the brother of Jesus who lived to be 120. So this is the premise we're working with. And when you understand that concept, James, I think it changes everything about the meat argument for most people. When you understand the lifespan detriment of eating a lot of flesh, I think it naturally makes you go, yeah, I'd rather not have to do that. And when people can say, okay, I can still get the same saturated fats and hormone healthy nutrients from eggs and milk that I was getting from meat, that feels safe. Let me try that. And then you get used to that diet for a while and realize, like I did, whoa, my testosterone has actually shot up like 140 points since I went off of meat. And I'm just eating a couple of eggs a day, sometimes a little bit of milk. And it feels like a much healthier way of eating and living. So now I've proven it to myself, and it's easy to eat this way. But I meet so many people, especially men, James, who are just like terrified to go off of meat for no other reason other than believing that they just can't have healthy testosterone. And it's like, okay, every carnivore influencer I know is on TRT, is on steroids, And here you and I are not eating meat and having almost 1,000 natural testosterone with no performance enhancing drugs, no peptides, no nothing. but diet and lifestyle, a strict vegetarian diet. It's like, so what's the argument again that you can't have healthy hormones without meat? We're living proof that you can. And if meat really is the more hormone healthy food group to eat, why are all the carnivores in the world on steroids?
Yeah, almost every carnivore influencer is on the juice. But we just find it's overall, it's a way more effective strategically to promote a vegetarian diet when trying to convert meat eaters, because it makes the diet way more accessible. And from personal experience, it made it way easier for me to transition, because all of these meat eaters believe that eggs and raw milk are like the premier source of nutrition. The best strategy, in my opinion, is to get them in the door with pescatarian or vegetarian, and then they build some momentum. They start burning fat and having more energy. And then they're like, I actually feel really good. Now I'm open to vegetarian, or now I'm open to veganism. So,
right.
And the other thing I'll add is we're talking about nutrition. I just have to plug my company, Organic Muscle, real quick, for support with this diet. I started this company 10 years ago, actually before I was a vegetarian, but I was a big believer in organic food. And all of our products are actually 100% vegan. And we have the best-selling organic pre-workout. Aaron uses it. Amazing, clean energy from organic beetroot and acai and yerba mate. We have organic plant protein powder, tonkat,
which I drink every day too.
Yes, he loves the protein.
Excellent plant protein.
Tonkat, which is a remarkable herb for boosting testosterone naturally. It's part of the reason why Aaron and I have such high testosterone levels on top of this diet. It's been around for millennia, revered.
Well, James, Organic Muscle is the only company in the world that sells organic tonkat.
Yes, the only one. We sourced it from, there's these amazing farms in Indonesia. They kind of sequester areas of the rainforest to grow the tonkat, and these families who grow it have been growing it for hundreds of years. So it's kind of like a family tradition, and it's so effective. We're available in Vitamin Shop nationwide, 715 stores. So go and check us out in Vitamin Shop or organicmuscle.com.
Yeah, amazing plant-based products. And it's also interesting, right, James, that all the supplements that people take to boost testosterone and hormones are herbs, tonkat, Fedosia agrestis, and even things like zinc and boron, which are found in plants. It's just funny, right? We take plants to boost our testosterone, but then say you can't have good testosterone if you only eat plants.
Yeah, and regarding muscle, we've built so much muscle and gotten so much stronger and also leaner fat-wise on this plant-based diet. And look at the animals out there that are the strongest. Gorillas and hippos and giraffes and elephants, they're all plant-based. So clearly there's biological life is capable of taking plants and all of the minerals there within and turning it into ridiculous amounts of muscle.
Yeah. Yeah. So, to our zealous vegan brothers and sisters who might be in the comments saying, oh, you guys shouldn't be justifying honey and milk and eggs because it's cruelty and stuff. We understand completely, but we feel like it's a bigger victory to give the world permission to say, look, you don't need to eat meat anymore. The factory farming industry is the biggest problem by far in terms of animal cruelty and suffering that we want to help put an end to. And so if we can give the world permission by saying, look, you can have eggs, for example, which are insanely nutrient dense, amazing protein profile, fast digesting. What do you get from meat that you don't get from eggs? Basically nothing. Eggs are one of the most nutrient dense foods on earth, and so is raw milk. That gives people the permission you're talking about, James, to feel more safe in making that transition. And then they may make the full jump to veganism after that. But that's why we stress it's the spiritual commitment, the oath you make to God, that really makes this diet work. If you don't make that shift where you say, God, I understand your law, your will is love and non-harm towards all sentient beings. So I will orient my life as best as possible in that direction to keep the commandments, as Jesus said. That's what allows you to make those decisions for yourself with your own conscience. And so if a vegan says, I don't feel like I can justify eating eggs in my conscience. No problem. That's your decision. For me, I can for the reasons I mentioned. And so again, it's a customizable type of thing. Now, the second layer of this is grains and starches. There's an interesting quote from Jesus in the Essene Gospel where he says that wheat is the most excellent of all herb-bearing seeds of the earth. And he recommends eating a lot of wheat. And we know that the wheat in America has been highly poisoned by glyphosate and DDT and so forth. And our soil's been poisoned so that wheat here in America is not very good for you, right? There's the whole gluten intolerance thing, which is like pretty much unique to America for the most part. When you go to Europe and you're eating pasta and bread rolls all day, everyone I've ever known who's gone to Europe has said this. They say, I eat bread all day and I feel amazing. And I lean out, I come back home feeling amazing. And I'm like, wow, if you ate bread in America all day, you would feel like crap, you know? I think that says something for how good wheat is for the human being when it's truly organic in its natural state and not contaminated. And interestingly, somebody else I highly respect, Rudolf Steiner, had the same take as Jesus on this issue, where Rudolf Steiner wrote about, and you put me onto this, James, that wheat is like the ultimate superfood for humans. And it's something about the sun. It's like an extension of the sunlight. Can you get into that for a second?
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner wrote extensively about the power of wheat and how the solar energy was infused into wheat and how civilization was basically built on wheat products like bread, sourdough bread. And I really think that the negative polarity understood this, and that's why the wheat supply in the United States has been completely corrupted and it's become a poison. This is what the negative polarity does. They take something that's extremely beneficial and turns it into a weapon. So, in speaking about Europe, when I was in Italy, I was eating the bread there and the pasta, and I just felt amazing. I felt so good. I felt absolutely invigorated. So, I think part of this Jesus Way movement, we can hopefully reclaim wheat as the powerful tool it is, and hopefully reestablish some farms. But I think Monsanto and some of these companies have actually like bought the rights to the seeds of wheat. So it makes it extremely difficult to even farm or truly organic wheat in the United States. Think about that.
Yeah.
They're playing God, trying to own the seeds and the DNA of the wheat. It's so demonic.
So evil, dude. Yeah. And wheat is also very high in protein, which is another great element of it. One of our favorite protein sources on our diet is seitan, which is like condensed wheat of some sort that they make it into like almost looks like ground beef or something. It's kind of packaged in crumbly form and it tastes amazing. You can put it on whatever food you want, like pasta or whatever. And it's very high in protein. It's like 40 grams of protein in like 1 cup worth of seitan. And so, yeah, it just goes to show you like wheat is very diverse and flexible as a herb. You can make bread out of it. You can make protein meals out of it. And it tastes amazing. And it's basically a carbohydrate that fuels your body with energy. Fruit is a very fast acting type of carbohydrate that gives your body glucose and fructose it can use immediately, like rocket fuel, it can just burn up. But grains and starches are a little more time extended, long lasting carbohydrate source that isn't going to give you the same boost and spike in energy that fruit and fruit juice and honey can give you, but it gives you a very nice sustained energy throughout the day. And so a big part of the Jesus diet for us and the way we like to orient it is to eat a very high carbohydrate, moderate protein, and low fat diet. And that's part of why the pyramid is structured the way that it is, with nuts and seeds and eggs and milk at the very top of the pyramid and carbohydrates at the very bottom. We want to be eating as much fruit as we can to give us that nice energy, longevity, and all the great nutrients that fruit gives, sustained energy throughout the day for grains and starches. And then we throw in some nuts and seeds, maybe some eggs and milk to get our fats and our protein. But we don't want to have high fat with high carbohydrates. That's the big mistake that I made when I tried vegetarianism years ago. And we're going to unpack the science of that next week in our following episode. But suffice to say, just to give you a good outline of this diet, this is the way we structure it. High carbohydrate for maximum sustained energy. And I mean, your entire body, every cell in your body runs on glucose. Your thyroid, your brain, your heart, everything needs glucose. And so when you eat a lot of healthy sources of glucose, you get amazing healthy effects in the body. The body thanks you for it with vibrant energy and all that. And then protein for muscle repair, recovery, organ repair, and all that good stuff. And then low fat. We don't need to be eating very much fat to have healthy hormone profiles. And this was a mistake that I also made, thinking I need to eat exorbitant amounts of fat to have healthy hormones. And yet I ate keto, James, when I came off of the vegetarian diet. And my testosterone did go up from like 250, 280, all the way to like 600, 650, somewhere in there, because I was eating like 250 grams of fat. But my thyroid levels were still not great. And I was told fat is what makes your thyroid healthy. And it didn't make sense to me. It was when I lowered my fat and boosted my carbohydrates up that my thyroid T3 and T4 cranked up through the roof. Now I got a crazy fast thyroid metabolism, and my testosterone went up another 140 points. Why? Because your thyroid creates the hormones that your body produces. So if you got a slow thyroid, you're going to have lower hormone profiles. So there's a synergy you find with this kind of diet where you go, wow, when it all is set up correctly, the body functions like this well-oiled machine and all the systems work in tandem to give you optimum levels of health. But you got to keep that balance, right, in your diet to keep that optimum level of health.
Right. And this is the mistake a lot of vegans and vegetarians make. And if you ever see an unhealthy vegetarian, they're probably making this mistake where they're eating a lot of refined carbs with a ton of fat. And if you look at India, a lot of time carnivores or meat eaters will use India as an example, that there's a lot of obesity, kind of like a lot of skinny fat type phenotypes and a lot of preventable diseases there. And it's because in India, it's usually an extremely high fat diet that, lots of very low quality oils. They also eat a lot of low quality dairy in India, surprisingly, but it's the mixing of the carbs and the fat that just will confuse your body and cause a whole host of issues. So if you can avoid that, you'll be in good shape. One more thing I wanted to add about grains is that if you need any more proof of the power of wheat, just look at the Bible and what we've been talking about. All of these disciples, they would live off bread. That's all they would eat. They would just eat bread and they would live to 120. Yeah. So, I mean, it's absolutely remarkable, and also makes me sad what's been stolen from us. But if you want to buy wheat products, source them from Italy. Italy has the highest standards in the world for wheat farming. So pasta, whatever, you could get bread making kits. You could even get bread. Any wheat product you get, source it from Italy. It will say made in Italy in the grocery store.
Nice. That's a good pro tip right there. And before we wrap up, one last thing I want to say is you brought up the processed vegan food. It's like, every vegan I know that's not healthy are the ones that are eating all the processed fake vegan food, Impossible burgers and stuff like that, and just vegan junk food. It's like, just because it's kind of like the whole gluten thing. It's like, oh, it's gluten-free, then it's healthy. It's like, no, absolutely not. Just because it doesn't have animal products in it doesn't just automatically make it healthy. You've got to have more sophistication in the way you think about these things. Processed food is always bad, no matter if it has animal products or not. And so, like, oftentimes people will, like, carnivores will come at us in the comments and say, like, oh, you impossible meat eating idiots or whatever. And it's like, wait, you think I eat Impossible burgers? Like, you think that I'm living off of Impossible meat? Like, I don't eat any of that garbage. I don't eat anything that's processed like that. But people just assume like all vegans eat the junky vegan food. And all the ones we know, James, we have a lot of close friends here in Austin that are like, some are 25-year vegans that are just glowing and look 10 years younger than their biological age. And they eat whole foods. They stick to the real plants, fruits, vegetables. They don't eat the processed junk. It's the same as with any other type of diet. Like, if you eat processed food, you're going to have bad health effects from it. If you eat whole organic food, you're going to have good effects from it. It's no different with veganism, right?
Hmm. Yeah, so well said. And I would just add that when people have problems with the vegan diet, I think a lot of it can also be that internally, philosophically, there's not the deep understanding of the golden rule. And I like
Mhm.
to say that just because you have compassion for animals, that doesn't mean you're a good person. You could still have disdain for human beings and lots of judgment in your heart. And Aaron and I have both seen it. We've encountered vegans who are the most glowing, warm, welcoming, beautiful people ever. And then there's vegans or vegetarians who have a very dark vibration and they appear unhealthy. And I think it's because their internal compass of morality is still very damaged and skewed, and they have bad will towards humans or judgment. So the glow that Aaron's referring to is a holistic thing where the diet and also the internal moral navigation system is totally honed in.
Well, to your point, James, one of the things that turned me on to this fact a couple of years ago at one of my retreats was meeting a woman who's been in 40U for many years named Stacy. Hopefully she's watching this because I'm going to give you a shout out, Stacy. I met her at the retreat and immediately I saw this amazing glow on her skin. Her skin looked so youthful and vibrant and healthy. And I'd heard some other people being like, wow, Stacy's skin looks like she's just glowing, man. Like everyone was talking about it. And I asked her, like, I just got to ask you, like, how do you get this glow? You just look amazing with this energy coming from your skin. And she says, oh, I'm a fruitarian. She's also deeply spiritual and embodied. So, like, that's a huge part of it, too. She had both elements working together and has this amazing glow. She looks way younger than her biological age. And she's been a fruitarian for a very long time. And I was like, whoa. So there's some serious light codes in fruit that I've not been aware of yet. And I started eating more fruit since then. And my skin has started to glow more and more and look more youthful in the very same way. And this is something we're going to talk about next week on our next episode. But when we discovered the science of sugar, the spiritual science of sugar, that what sugar really is literally frozen sunlight. And when you eat it, you're eating straight ATP from the sun that a plant produced through photosynthesis. It was like, oh, now we're unlocking some next dimension of understanding on this issue. That there's actual light codes in these fruits that are unique to fruit in this way, being high in sugar and fructose. And so it makes sense that it produces some of these incredible spiritual benefits. And I'm excited to unpack that more next week. But the last big staple for the Jesus diet as we close is fasting. Now, we've talked about how the Essenes would fast a lot. Jesus essentially gives this prescription, and I'll read the quote, but the prescription is essentially intermittent fasting every day. You eat within an 8-hour window or something like that. Give your body about 16 hours a day of not needing to digest food. And then once a week, on the Sabbath preferably, you do some type of 24-hour fast. And so we'll unpack that. But here's what the quote says: trouble not the work of the angels in your body by eating often. For I tell you truly, he who eats more than twice in the day does in him the work of Satan. And forget not that every seventh day is holy and consecrated to God. On 6 days, feed your body with the gifts of the earthly mother. But on the seventh day, sanctify your body for your heavenly Father. And let not food trouble the work of the angels in your body. And God will give you long life upon the earth. One quick thing here, James, we haven't touched on is when Jesus says the work of Satan, he doesn't mean like Satan himself will possess your body or something. He means the work of Satan, meaning death, destruction, dissolution, decay. The work of
Disease.
Satan is, yeah, disease, right? It's what deteriorates life. What does not produce life is the work of Satan. God is the God of life. Satan is the God of death and disease and suffering. So that's all he's really referring to is like that two ways philosophy. And so the key here is, as we said before, digestion is the most energy expensive process in the body. Even biology reveals this, James, where biologists will look at the ribosomes in your cells to determine how fast you're aging and what your biological age is. It's one of the metrics for longevity because the more calories you consume is the faster your cellular turnover is going to be, aka the faster you're aging. Your skin cells, all the cells in your body are always replicating. And when they replicate faster, you're turning them over faster. So you're aging quicker. So what you want is a slower cellular turnover because your cells are so healthy. So this is why fasting is another huge code, like the sugar in fruit, just giving you energy, burning body fat. Fasting is very similar. It activates longevity hormones. It allows your body to go into autophagy and cellular cleaning, which is also very good for extending your lifespan. So the idea is if we know that the body does best on a lower calorie diet, then what we can do is we can squeeze our food into about 8 hours a day. And then for 16 hours a day, we're giving our body a break from digestion, which means it can clean up the cells, which means it's going to slow down the rate we're aging. We're going to have more energy, feel more vitality, and so forth. If you're always digesting food, right, you're going to feel slow and sluggish. You're going to have brain fog. You're going to not sleep as well. There's a certain way the body's meant to work. You have the AMPK, mTOR balance. Like you've got to figure out the way that God intended your body to work, or there's going to be consequences. And one of the ways God intended our bodies to work is that we don't need to eat food all the time. I mean, what a burdensome way of living would that be if like God made it so that we have to eat every 2 hours, like people say? Like, what a freaking drag that would be. I would rather just get my food in a few hours and then go enjoy my life and feel great. And so that's what Jesus is prescribing here with the intermittent fasting. So to me, James, the intermittent fasting is the most important part of this. If you can just do intermittent fasting, even 7 days a week, and don't even do the 24-hour fast, you're off to an amazing start. There's so many health benefits to intermittent fasting alone. But the reason I've changed my mind a little bit on the 24-hour fast, James, is that I did this initially with like a water fast. You and I were doing this actually. We would do a water fast every Sunday, and then we switched to juice fasting, and that was a little bit better. But what I learned is that I can't eat enough calories if I'm taking one whole day off every week to maintain the level of lean body mass that I want and some other things. So I changed it to a fruit fast for me personally on Sundays. So the way I'm teaching the Jesus diet now, James, is a little more flexible on the 24-hour fast portion. What I'll say to people now is just do some kind of fast on a Sunday or whatever day of the week you want, because it's more about the spiritual implication than anything else. If you're doing intermittent fasting every day, you're kind of covering your bases with fasting. You can definitely overdo fasting, just like you can underdo it. People that fast too much run into some big problems with their metabolism, with their insulin, and so forth. So we have to find balance with fasting too. So what we do now is like a sugar fast or a fruit fast, where we'll just have fruit or fruit juice or honey on a given day, pretty much just carbohydrates. And there's a lot of amazing health effects from that in and of itself, but it's more about the spiritual implication of when I fast, I'm consecrating this day to God. I think that's the more important dynamic there in the 24-hour fast.
Yeah, the fasting is just a remarkable practice for everyone, as you said, Aaron. If there's one thing you could do that will benefit your life and your health, it is fasting. So intermittent fasting is a tremendous way to get the ball rolling and establish some momentum. And totally hear you about if you're trying to keep your body weight and energy, the fruit fasting is so effective. It's just a game changer. I will say that the water fasting and the more extended fast can serve a great benefit for autophagy, but even more than that, if you're struggling with addiction or a noisy mind, fasting is extremely effective because it gives you an opportunity to conquer your own mind. And Hasatan, the adversary, because he comes whispering, "Oh, come on, eat, bro. Come on, go to the fridge, eat." And you just like battle for a day or two that voice. And eventually you build that muscle where you could overcome the voice that's telling you to do something that you don't want to do. That I've consecrated this day to God. I'm not eating. And you literally can defeat the voice of the devil in your mind. And that carries over into your life after the fast ends, where I found after a long fast, I could say no to temptation much easier. So that's the real benefit. But in certain circumstances, it can, slow down your metabolism. It could have some negative effects if it's done too much, or if you're at a low body weight, it's probably not necessary or even helpful at that point. But this is why, Aaron, this is so helpful, because we're giving a nuanced, flexible view of all these things. And it's up to your own discernment to come in here and look at this food diet and the fasting protocols and decide what is correct for your individual situation.
Yeah, well said, man. And in fact, in the Essene gospel, the first story, I believe, is a bunch of sick people come to Jesus, and he gives them the prescription of a 7-day water fast, and all their diseases are healed. And if you've ever done an extended water fast, you know, oh yeah, that's one way to heal the body. It is not easy. It's very difficult, but you reach a certain threshold that's incredible to experience for yourself, to give you a real tangible taste of just how amazing you can feel when your body's full of prana and energy and LFE and all that, and you're not weighing your body down with tons of digestion. It's like a whole new level of consciousness gets unlocked. But it takes about 3 days usually to get over that hump where the detoxification's really dragging you down for a while, and the hunger pains and all that. But the hunger signals, the ghrelin gets shut off, and then you just start soaring and feeling amazing. And I've heard people heal like any kind of disease or ailment or injury you can think of. I've had people have broken bones that healed within, a couple of weeks because they did a 7-day water fast. And the autophagy it does almost miracles in your body. It's pretty amazing. So all that to say, like, if you feel called to do a water fast every Sunday like we did, absolutely. If you want to do a juice fast, absolutely. If you want to do a fruit only fast, if you want to do a rice only fast, pick your fast. It's up to you, right? But do something that is somewhat challenging for you, because the whole purpose is that fasting builds spiritual willpower, which is what you were kind of touching on there, James. So we'll stop the presentation there, and we'll just kind of wrap up by saying that, again, we're not proselytizing any kind of belief system that you have to follow. We're giving this to you today as a new option that you can take and try for yourself. And we do encourage you to try it. And again, customize it the way you want. But for us, our philosophy on this is simple. Just try to move towards truth. If it's too scary for you to think about going off of meat today, and you're like, I don't know if I can do it, guys. I hear what you're saying. I hear the arguments, but I don't know if I'm ready yet. No problem. Just do something that moves you towards truth. I was at a book signing event this week for my book, The 3 Beliefs of Ego, in LA. And Stacy was there, and she was glowing like she always has before. And there was a guy in that conversation with us who said, Aaron, everything you say about killing animals and flesh consumption just totally resonates. I know you're right about this, but I'm just too afraid to go off meat, man. I don't want my hormones to tank. And like, how do you do it? And I said, don't worry, man. We got an episode coming for you that's going to unpack all of this. And this is the only prescription we'll give you. Just move towards truth, whatever that feels like. If you feel like you could be a little bit healthier, then just make one change in your diet or lifestyle today that can move you towards that better level of health. If that's giving up meat, great. If it's going pescatarian, great. If it's going on eggs and raw milk instead of protein from meat, that's great. But if you're moving towards truth, you are following the Jesus way. God doesn't expect us to be all perfect and never make a mistake or something like that. We're all evolving. We're all on a spiritual journey. That's the whole purpose of life. So there's no judgment in this toward anybody in any kind of diet. But we want to help everybody thrive the way that we're thriving and feel the same level of health and vitality that we enjoy every day. So that's why next week, we're going to do a deep dive into our blood levels. We're going to show you before and after pictures, DEXA scans. We're going to give you all the proofs that you want to see to know that this diet really does produce amazing health benefits for the human body. And it can do that for you as well. So with all that being said, is there anything you want to say, James, to close this out?
I just wanted to say that, again, Aaron and I didn't expect to be on this journey. I never in a million years expected to be, sharing a message about the spirituality of a vegetarian diet. That would have just blown my mind just a couple of years ago. But that's how profoundly affected we've been by this. And the transformation of our consciousness and our health is undeniable. And we're going to get into that next week, our blood levels, and deeper into the shifts in our consciousness and just the compassion and love in our hearts. It's all just skyrocketed. So You know, give it a try if you feel called to this message. Move towards truth. If you want to keep eating meat, that's fine, but maybe stop eating factory farmed meat. If you want to
There you
move
go.
in, yeah, transition to pescatarian. Just make some kind of move towards being a more loving, compassionate person. That's all we could do, anyways. None of us are perfect. We're just trying to move towards God. So, yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for listening. We love you guys.
Yeah. Well said, man. And as a final admonition, like if what we've touched on today, the spiritual ethics of all of this has really resonated with you, then again, just move towards truth in whatever way that looks like. What we do isn't the ultimate litmus test we're being put through, it's the intention for why we do it. And so, yes, we can do bad actions that have good intentions. That can happen. But those are punished by the laws of the universe far less than bad actions with bad intentions, right? When you know what you're doing is wrong and you're justifying it, that's what we want to get away from. So if your conscience has been moved by this conversation, congratulations. If you're the kind of person that James mentioned who's a meat eater and you've watched this whole podcast, congratulations. That is truly something laudable because it means you are convicted and you want to move towards truth. And that's what pleases the heart of God, right? That's the Jesus way, is just humble yourself before God and try your best to keep God's commandments. If you're moving towards truth, you're pleasing the heart of God. And so you can do that in whatever way you feel resonates with you. And so with that being said, we'll close this episode and we'll come back next week with part 2. Thank you all so much for watching. We hope you were deeply blessed and inspired by today's episode. And as always, get out there and love God and love people. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Jesus Way podcast. Peace and love.